Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the kitchen counter. I sipped my coffee, scrolling through work emails on my phone. Sarah breezed in, her phone glued to her hand as usual, her lips curved in a distracted smile. "Morning," she said, absently pecking my cheek. "Morning," I replied, studying her for a moment. She looked different. There was an energy about her I couldn't place, something I hadn't seen in years. I wanted to ask her about it, but I knew better. Sarah hated being questioned about her moods. We had been married for 15 years, a long time by most standards. Life was good, or so I thought. We had 2 wonderful kids, a comfortable home, and a rhythm to our lives that felt steady and reliable. But lately, something felt off. Sarah was distant, distracted. She had always been busy with her job as an account manager at a marketing firm, but this was different. "Busy day ahead?" I asked casually. "Always," she replied, grabbing her travel mug and slipping her phone into her bag. "Meeting with a big client today. Could be a late one." She flashed me a quick smile and was gone before I could say another word. The house felt strangely quiet after she left. I shook off the unease that had been building in me for weeks. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe work was just stressful for her. But deep down, I knew better. The signs were there, I just didn't want to see them. The first real crack appeared one Saturday evening. Sarah had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went upstairs to shower. I was cleaning up after dinner when it buzzed, lighting up with a notification. A single text message. "Can't wait for this weekend, baby. Counting the hours." I stared at the screen, my stomach tightening. The sender's name was Nick, a name I didn't recognize. My mind raced. Was it a work thing? A joke? A wrong number? But the message was too intimate, too familiar to be professional. The sound of water running upstairs brought me back to reality. I quickly turned off the phone screen and set it down, pretending I hadn't seen anything. My hands trembled as I finished washing the dishes. My brain was a storm of questions and doubts. Was I reading too much into it? Or was this exactly what it seemed? That night, Sarah seemed oblivious to my turmoil. She was unusually cheerful, laughing at a silly sitcom we were watching in the living room. I forced myself to laugh along, but my mind kept drifting back to that text. The way it felt like an unspoken confession sitting on the counter between us. The next few days were a blur. I tried to focus on work, but my thoughts kept circling back to Sarah's phone. I couldn't confront her, not yet. I needed to know more before jumping to conclusions. So, I waited. Watched. Collected little pieces of the puzzle. Her behavior didn't change much, but now I noticed things I hadn't before. She was always on her phone, smiling at messages she never shared. She started dressing up more for work, wearing outfits she hadn't touched in years. And then there were the late nights, always with some vague excuse about meetings or deadlines. One evening, while she was in the shower again, I gave in to the temptation and unlocked her phone. I knew her passcode, it was our anniversary date, of all things. My hands shook as I navigated to her messages. The thread with Nick was there, and it confirmed everything I had feared. Their messages were intimate, filled with inside jokes and subtle references to time spent together. They had been meeting during her so-called work trips, sneaking away for weekends at hotels and making plans to see each other again. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the evidence, each message a dagger to my chest. I put the phone back before she could catch me, but the damage was done. The truth was out, and there was no going back. Over the next few weeks, I became a man possessed. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. My mind was consumed with thoughts of Sarah and Nick. I started digging deeper, looking for more evidence. I checked her emails, her social media, even her work calendar. Everywhere I looked, I found more signs of betrayal. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed a plan, something that would give me the upper hand. I wasn't going to let her destroy our family without consequences. So, I reached out to a lawyer, gathering advice on how to protect myself and the kids. I started documenting everything, saving messages, taking screenshots, even recording her phone calls when I could. I felt like a stranger in my own home, living a double life as I prepared for the inevitable confrontation. Sarah, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to my growing awareness. She continued her charade, acting like nothing was wrong. It was infuriating. The breaking point came one Friday night. Sarah told me she was going out with coworkers and might be home late. I pretended to believe her, watching from the living room window as she got into her car and drove away. But instead of going to bed, I followed her. I stayed a few cars behind, careful not to get too close. She drove across town to a fancy hotel, where she parked and went inside. I waited for a few minutes before following her in. The lobby was bustling, but I spotted her near the elevator, laughing with a man I assumed was Nick. I froze, my fists clenching at my sides. They didn't see me, too wrapped up in their own little world. I watched as they disappeared into the elevator, my mind racing with rage and humiliation. This was it, the proof I needed. I didn't confront them that night. Instead, I went home and started putting my plan into motion. This wasn't just about exposing Sarah's betrayal, it was about making sure she faced the consequences of her actions. And I wasn't going to stop until I got the justice I deserved. The night after seeing Sarah and Nick at the hotel, I sat in my darkened living room, replaying the events in my mind. Every laugh, every touch, every moment of their intimacy had burned itself into my memory like a brand. My chest tightened as I thought of the years I had wasted believing in a marriage that now felt like a lie. I couldn't sit idly by. It was time to act. I started the next morning. Armed with the evidence I had gathered, I made an appointment with a lawyer. My goal was clear, to secure my children's future and protect myself from any fallout. Divorce was the only way forward, but I needed to ensure it was on my terms. Jennifer Pratt's office was crisp and professional, filled with bookshelves lined with leather-bound legal tomes. She welcomed me with a firm handshake and a knowing look, as if she had seen my type before, a man holding his dignity together by a thread. "Tell me everything," she said, gesturing for me to sit. I laid it all out, the text messages, the hotel rendezvous, Sarah's growing detachment. I even showed her the screenshots I had saved on a flash drive. Jennifer's face remained impassive as she flipped through the files. "You've done your homework," she said finally. "This evidence is solid. With it, we can make a strong case for custody and asset protection." "What about the house?" I asked. "It's in both our names, but I want to keep it for the kids." "Given her infidelity, the courts will likely favor you," Jennifer replied. "But we need to be strategic. Don't let on that, you know. Continue documenting everything, and let me handle the legal side." Her confidence was reassuring, but it didn't erase the knot of anger and betrayal in my gut. Still, I had a plan now, a roadmap for how to navigate the wreckage of my marriage. It was a small comfort. I realized I couldn't do this alone. I needed allies, people who could corroborate my story or provide additional support. The first person I thought of was Sarah's best friend, Monica. Monica had always been loyal to Sarah, but I suspected she didn't approve of Nick. I decided to test the waters. Over coffee the next day, I casually brought up Sarah's frequent work trips. "She's been traveling a lot lately," I said. "It's hard to keep up." Monica's face tightened. She stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, avoiding my gaze. "Yeah, she's been busy." "Have you met Nick?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "He seems to come up a lot in her stories." Monica hesitated, her spoon clinking against the ceramic mug. I've met him, she admitted. Look, John, I don't want to get involved, but maybe you should talk to Sarah. She's not the same person she used to be. Her words confirmed my suspicions. Monica wasn't on board with whatever Sarah was doing, but she wasn't ready to betray her friend either. Still, her discomfort was enough to strengthen my resolve. Next, I reached out to Nick's wife, Karen. I wasn't sure how she would react, but I knew she deserved to know the truth. After some internet sleuthing, I found her contact information and called her under the guise of discussing work. It wasn't long before the real topic came up. I think there's something going on between our spouses, I said gently. I have proof. Karen was silent for a long moment. Then her voice, shaky but determined, came through the line. I knew something was wrong. He's been distant, and there've been unexplained trips. Send me what you have. I forwarded her the screenshots and waited. Within an hour, she called back, her voice hard with anger. Thank you for telling me. I'll handle it from my end. Keep me in the loop. I hung up, feeling a strange mix of relief and guilt. It wasn't easy dragging someone else into this mess, but I needed Karen on my side. Together, we could expose the truth. In the days that followed, I continued to watch Sarah closely. She seemed oblivious to my growing awareness, still caught up in her double life. But I noticed the little things, the way she smiled at her phone, the excuses she made for being late, the careful way she avoided my gaze when I asked about her day. One evening, she came home late, her cheeks flushed and her hair slightly disheveled. I could smell the faint trace of cologne that wasn't mine. How was work? I asked casually, masking my anger. Exhausting, she said, dropping her bag on the counter. I'm going to take a shower. As soon as she disappeared upstairs, I opened her bag and pulled out her phone. It was locked, but I didn't need to access it. The notifications on the lock screen told me enough. Nick's name was there, along with a message, I miss you already. Can't wait for next time. I snapped a picture of the screen with my own phone and put hers back exactly as I found it. The evidence was piling up, and my patience was running thin. The tipping point came a week later. Sarah announced she was going on another work trip, this time for the weekend. I played along, pretending to believe her. But as soon as she left, I tracked her location using the software I had installed on her phone. She wasn't headed to a conference or a client meeting. She was driving to the same hotel where I had seen her with Nick before. My blood boiled, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was my chance to gather the final piece of evidence. I drove to the hotel and waited in the parking lot. Sure enough, I saw Sarah and Nick walk out together, laughing and holding hands. They got into his car and drove off, oblivious to my presence. I followed them to a nearby restaurant, where they sat in a corner booth, their heads close together. I took pictures from a distance, my heart pounding with rage. It was surreal, watching my wife, the woman I had shared my life with, act so openly with another man. But the surrealism only fueled my determination. As they left the restaurant, I followed them back to the hotel. They disappeared inside, and I knew they wouldn't be coming out anytime soon. I snapped a few more photos of them entering the building and drove home, my mind racing with plans for what was to come. The storm was no longer gathering, it was here. I had all the evidence I needed to confront Sarah, to take control of the narrative, and to ensure she faced the consequences of her betrayal. The next steps would be the hardest, but I was ready. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming my life. The next morning, the house felt colder than usual, though it wasn't the temperature that chilled me. Sarah's absence loomed over everything, a reminder of the double life she was living. I spent the early hours reviewing the evidence one more time. Photos, screenshots, call logs, it was all there, each piece a damning testament to her betrayal. By noon, I had reached my decision. I would confront her as soon as she returned from her work trip. No more waiting. No more pretending. It was time for her to face the consequences. Sarah walked through the door around 3 p.m., her suitcase in hand and a bright smile plastered on her face. If she suspected anything, she didn't show it. "Hey," she said cheerily, setting her bag down by the door. "How were the kids this weekend?" "They were great," I replied evenly. "Missed you, though." Her smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. "I missed you guys too." She leaned in for a kiss, but I turned my head, letting her lips graze my cheek. A flicker of confusion crossed her face, but she didn't press it. Instead, she busied herself with unpacking, chatting about her supposed client meetings and the stressful weekend she had endured. I watched her from across the room, my arms folded. Every word she spoke was another nail in the coffin of our marriage. Once she had finished unpacking, I called her into the living room. I had already set up my laptop on the coffee table, the screen glowing ominously. Sarah hesitated in the doorway, sensing the shift in my demeanor. "What's up?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the couch. Her smile faded completely now. "John, you're scaring me." "Good," I said, my voice cold. "Because you should be scared." She sat down slowly, her eyes darting between me and the laptop. I opened the first folder and turned the screen toward her. It was a photo of her and Nick, hand in hand outside the hotel. Her face went pale. "What is this?" she stammered. "It's proof," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions churning inside me. "Proof of your affair. Proof of every lie you've told me." Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I clicked through more photos, more screenshots, more evidence. Each one hit her like a slap to the face. "John, I can explain," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't," I snapped. "Don't insult me by trying to explain this away. I've seen everything. I know everything." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. "Not now. Not after what she had done." "Why?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Why would you do this? Was I not enough for you? Were the kids not enough?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "It wasn't like that," she said, her voice trembling. I didn't mean for it to happen. Don't lie to me." I roared, slamming my hand on the coffee table. "You meant for it to happen every single time you lied to me, every time you snuck away to be with him. So don't you dare tell me it wasn't intentional." Sarah sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I let her cry, the weight of her actions finally crashing down on her. But I wasn't done yet. After a long silence, I handed her a manila envelope. She looked at it with red-rimmed eyes, her hands shaking. "What's this?" she asked. "Divorce papers," I said bluntly. "I've already filed. You can either sign them and make this as painless as possible, or we can go to court. But I promise you, Sarah, if it comes to that, I will destroy you." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You can't do this," she whispered. "I can," I said firmly. "And I will." "You betrayed me, Sarah. You betrayed our family. You don't get to play the victim here." "What about the kids?" she asked desperately. "What will they think?" "They'll know the truth," I said. "I won't sugarcoat it, but I'll spare them the ugly details. Unlike you, I won't lie to them." Sarah broke down again, clutching the envelope as if it were a lifeline. I watched her without pity. This was the bed she had made, and now she had to lie in it. Before she could gather herself, I delivered the final blow. "Oh, and one more thing," I said, pulling out my phone. "I told Nick's wife. She knows everything." Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes wide with horror. You didn't, she whispered. I did, I said. She deserved to know, just like I did. And from what I hear, Nick isn't handling things very well. Seems like his little fantasy life is falling apart too. Sarah's sobs turned into wails, but I felt nothing but satisfaction. For the first time in months, I felt like I had control of my life again. I left her sitting on the couch, clutching the envelope and crying into her hands. I needed air, needed to escape the suffocating weight of the confrontation. I walked out into the backyard, the cool evening breeze hitting my face. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief. The confrontation was over. The truth was out. There was still a long road ahead, but I was ready for it. I had faced the storm and come out stronger. Sarah had made her choices, and now she would face the consequences. As for me, I was done being the victim. It was time to rebuild, on my terms. The days following the confrontation were strangely quiet. Sarah had moved out temporarily, staying with her sister while the logistics of our separation were hashed out. The kids were still adjusting, confused but resilient. I tried my best to keep their routines intact, to shield them from the chaos that had erupted around them. I thought the worst was behind me. I thought the path ahead was clear, even if it was steep. But life, it seems, had one more twist in store. One rainy afternoon, as I was sorting through old files in my home office, an envelope fell out of an overstuffed drawer. It wasn't marked with anything unusual, just my name written in Sarah's handwriting. Curious, I opened it. Inside was a letter, dated 2 years ago. Dear John. If you're reading this, it means I've been too much of a coward to say these things to your face. I don't know how to begin, so I'll start with the truth. I've been unhappy for a long time. Not because of you, you've always been kind, patient, and loving, but because of me. I feel like I've lost myself, like I've become a shadow of the person I used to be. I never wanted to hurt you or the kids. But somewhere along the way, I let resentment and loneliness creep in. I blamed you for things that weren't your fault. I made choices I'm not proud of, choices that will probably destroy the life we've built together. For that, I'm so sorry. You deserve better than me, John. You deserve someone who can love you the way you've always loved me. I don't know if I'll ever be brave enough to give you this letter, but if I do, I hope it helps you understand. I'll always love you, even if I don't deserve your love in return. Sarah. My hands trembled as I finished reading. I sat there, staring at the letter, trying to reconcile the woman who wrote these words with the one who had lied to my face for months. She had known, even then, that she was spiraling out of control. And yet, instead of seeking help, she had chosen to destroy what we had. But there was more to the letter. A folded slip of paper fell out as I turned the envelope over. It was a receipt, a DNA test kit, purchased around the same time as the letter. My heart sank as realization dawned. I raced upstairs to the closet where we kept old paperwork and personal items. After digging through boxes, I found what I was looking for, a small, unopened box with the name of a popular DNA testing company stamped on it. Sarah had never used it. Why had she bought it? And why hadn't she told me? Questions swirled in my mind, each more troubling than the last. My hands shook as I opened the box and followed the instructions to take my own sample. If there were doubts she had hidden, I needed answers. 2 weeks later, the results arrived. The email notification buzzed on my phone while I was cooking dinner for the kids. My heart raced as I opened it, scrolling through the genetic analysis until I found what I was looking for, my paternity match with Emma and Jacob. Emma, 99.9% biological relationship. Jacob, 0% biological relationship. I froze, the words blurring on the screen. My mind reeled. Jacob wasn't mine. How could this be? My son, the boy I had raised and loved for 10 years, wasn't biologically mine. The ground seemed to shift beneath my feet. I thought back to the timing. Jacob had been born just a year after Sarah's first, big work trip. My stomach churned as the pieces fell into place. This wasn't just one affair, it had started long ago, hidden in plain sight. That night, I called Sarah. My voice was calm, but my words were razor-sharp. "We need to talk." She came over an hour later, her face pale as she stepped inside. I handed her the DNA results without a word. She scanned the page, her hands trembling. "John, Don't," I said, cutting her off. "Don't you dare try to explain this away. How long have you known?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Since the beginning," she whispered. "I wasn't sure at first, but I suspected." "Who?" I demanded. "Who is his father?" She hesitated, then said a name that hit me like a freight train. "Nick. The man she was currently having an affair with." The rage that had simmered inside me boiled over. "You've been lying to me for a decade. Not just about now, but about everything. About him." "I didn't know how to tell you," she sobbed. "I was scared. I thought it wouldn't matter. You've been such a good father to Jacob." I shook my head in disbelief. "It matters, Sarah. It matters more than you'll ever understand." That night, I made a decision. I couldn't keep dragging myself through the wreckage of our marriage. The love I once had for Sarah was gone, buried beneath years of lies and betrayal. I finalized the divorce papers the next morning, requesting full custody of Emma and shared custody of Jacob. He wasn't my biological son, but he was still my son in every way that mattered. As I packed up Sarah's remaining belongings, I stumbled upon an old photo album. Inside was a picture of us on our wedding day, smiling and full of hope. I stared at it for a long time before closing the album and placing it in the box. That chapter of my life was over. Months later, life had settled into a new normal. The divorce was finalized, and Sarah moved to another state, leaving Nick behind. Emma and Jacob were thriving, and I had started seeing a therapist to process everything. One evening, as the kids played in the backyard, Jacob ran up to me, his face lit with excitement. "Dad, come play with us." Dad. The word hit me differently now, with all its weight and complexity. Jacob didn't know the truth, and I wasn't sure if he ever needed to. What mattered was the bond we shared, the love that couldn't be broken by biology or betrayal. I smiled and joined him in the yard, the sound of their laughter filling the air. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. The storm had passed, and though it left scars, it also left clarity. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And that was enough.